the city and the province has raised basically no evidence to support that COVID was deadly.
Shame on these police. Look at what they've started now.
So we've been working on this for quite a few years. It's been an uphill battle. We think it's mostly bogus, and we'll see when we get in front of this judge.
The outcome of this case could set a significant precedent for freedom and accountability. Back in the early COVID lockdown days in November of 2020, one man stood up when almost no one else was. Adam Skelly, now sadly the former owner of Adamson Barbecue in Etobicoke, Toronto, defied the brutal COVID lockdowns. He kept the doors of his restaurant open, served food, and turned his establishment into a sanctuary for freedom, the so-called barbecue rebellion. Police arrested him, public health seized his property, locked him out of his own restaurant, and slapped him with charges and massive fines. Adam didn't back down. Fast forward now, almost 6 years later, and he's living free on a rural farm in Alberta with his wife and 4 children. And this week, his day in court will finally come. Adam's constitutional charter challenge against the Orwellian-worded Reopening Ontario Act hits the Ontario Superior Court beginning tomorrow, Wednesday, February 25th. This could be one of the last most comprehensive efforts at declaring those lockdowns unconstitutional. I sat down with Adam to catch up on where he's at, what this challenge means, and why it matters to every Canadian who values liberty. Adam describes his life now as real freedom after being brutalized in Ontario, and best yet, the Alberta government leaves him and his family alone.
Yeah, we're living in that kind of way here. It certainly feels free. We're taking a lot of responsibility for, the food that we eat and the work that we do. A lot of that's happening right here on the farm. And the government's been awesome to deal with. They've left us alone and only engaged with us as far as we choose to. So it's been, a fantastic time out here, and we appreciate Alberta.
After surviving Toronto's tyranny, Alberta offered some much-needed breathing room, but Adam's not done fighting for freedom.
We're working with Ian Perry at Perry's LLP. He's got our full faith. He's doing a wonderful job so far. This is a constitutional application. So it's basically a redo of the application that we had back in 2021. It's in very similar form, and that one was struck for lack of jurisdiction because the lawyer at the time, Michael Swinwood, didn't file that constitutional challenge with an originating process, like a notice of application. He filed it like on a motion for something else. I'm not quite sure. So anyway, he messed up big time on that. We've reached a settlement with him on that. Those funds have been now going towards this new challenge. So we've been working on this for quite a few years. It's been an uphill battle, to say the least, to get to this point. We've overcome a $30,000 security for costs order that we were made to pay. That's basically paying the Crown's costs in advance of the hearing. So that was really hard to come up with that money. We're claiming a bunch of charter violations. Section 2B for freedom of expression, 7, life and liberty, the right to peaceful protest, as well as a few others, cruel and unusual punishment. If a charter breach is found, the government is going to say that they're saved under Section 1, which means that it was a reasonable thing to do and demonstrably justified. Now, that's where our expert comes in. We've engaged with 5 different PhD experts from across North America. One of them was like the former head of the FDA. We had one before that was the former chief medical officer of health for Manitoba, but he bailed on us all of a sudden with no explanation. So that took a lot of time to find someone else who could opine on public health. We're getting down to the whole like how to lie with statistics thing. Remember, they were classifying COVID deaths like in their formal records that people who died with COVID were a COVID death when there was an average of 3.7 comorbidities that went along with that. And like the average age of a COVID death was 89 and the average death age in Canada was 87. Yet they were saying everybody else needs to lock down. So we argue that it wasn't demonstrably justified. The city and the province has raised basically no evidence to support that COVID was deadly, that a lot of people were dying, that asymptomatic transmission was a real thing. You remember that? For the first time ever, it was healthy people get healthy people sick. And then they're like, oh, you took a test and we spun this thing up 45 times on the PCR machine. Dr. Fauci was quoted as saying, when you run that test at that many cycles, you're just getting dead nucleotides and it can't detect an infectious person. But yet all those records and everyone was getting forced to test. So it was inflating these case counts. And anyway, we're getting to the core of all of that with our charter challenge. Now, like I said, the city and the province has proffered very little evidence to support the lockdowns, and they're relying on procedural arguments like we're out of time to bring this challenge. It's the wrong jurisdiction to bring it in. Like we're supposed to be in some different court, like a judicial review court. We think it's mostly bogus, and we'll see when we get in front of this judge. Sounds like we've got a great judge. Her name's Janet Leiper, and she was the former integrity commissioner for Toronto, and she had, took on that office in a few different jurisdictions as well. So she's used to holding politicians accountable. She had a pretty notable ruling in 2024 talking about that for major issues at law, you need a standard of correctness, not so much reasonableness. So I'm hoping that she'll apply that same line of thinking to her decision when we finally get it.
The hearing will take place from Wednesday, February 25th through to Friday, February 27th at the Ontario Superior Court of Justice in Toronto. Adam has emphasized that these proceedings should not be treated as a rally or a protest. Those who wish to attend are encouraged to do so in order to observe what he describes as a serious effort to bring scientific integrity and sound reasoning to Ontario's COVID policies. Attendees are asked to show respect for the court and this process through appropriate attire and conduct, as the outcome of this case could set a significant precedent for freedom and accountability.
If we get the declarations that we're seeking, that the ROA is found to be unconstitutional and it wasn't saved by Section 1, then other affected businesses, like tons of people who were shut down for no reason during COVID, would then have like some supporting case law if they chose to do a civil claim or something like that after. Is it the last one in Ontario? It might be. I know there's one in BC run by Kip Warner and the Canadian Society for the Advancement of Science and Public Policy, and that one's like a class action with Bonnie Henry. Kind of similar to ours, how we've got medical officer of health on there, Eileen Davila, as a named party. It seems like there's definitely a lot riding on it for me, maybe for other people. And yeah, we just pray that it goes well, that we get a judge who wants to hear these arguments, that'll let it be adjudicated on its merits and not just over some procedural stuff that the government would like to see it thrown out for.
It's worth noting that Eileen Davila was the then medical officer of health for Toronto and oversaw the implementation of these sweeping directives and mandates, which absolutely warrants closer examination and public scrutiny.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things to do with Eileen Davila and the action she took during that whole time. So one thing is that there's a big dispute between the city of Toronto and the province about whether these lockdowns should happen. So Eileen was writing these recommendations to the province saying you got to do lockdowns again, and admitted that she didn't have the authority to do it. Then Doug Ford came out a few days before that second wave lockdown, November of 2020, and he said, I'm not going to lock down again without seeing the hard evidence. And then 2 days later, they did the lockdowns. The hard evidence was never given to us. It was all protected by NDA. So there's an article about this if you look it up. The city of Toronto basically had a private meeting with the province, and they gave their advice on why there should be another round of lockdowns. And then they wrapped up that whole meeting under non-disclose agreements. When we deposed Eileen Davila on this application, she refused all the questions about that. She refused to provide the evidence that supported shutting restaurants down. She relied on some one press conference that was hers, like she was giving the advice to which the advice that she took to make her recommendations was like her own advice. It wasn't external. It was like her own thing she had written. The document that she was referencing like mysteriously disappeared off the City of Toronto website. We found it on Wayback Machine, but it's like gone from their listings. And she refused basically every question. If you guys remember, I had 2 successful days of protest there. Like David Benzies was there. We had a couple good interviews. And I just kept operating. I was trying to get the Reopening Ontario Act ticket. That took 2 days to get it. And I wanted to take that to court and bring our evidence to show the lockdowns weren't justified. But on the 3rd day, Eileen Davila signed a Trespass to Property Act notice claiming to be the occupants of my building. So her role is it's governed by the Health Protection and Promotion Act. And there's Section 102 in there, as well as a couple other sections, allow her to seek a court order from a judge, like going through judicial scrutiny, to become the occupant of a premises. Maybe occupant's the wrong word, but to seize a premises. She didn't do that. She just invoked federal trespass law, which is like for property owners, right? And people who are renting, to trespass people off of it. She invoked that to stop me from going in. And then she hired the Toronto Police Service as a private security detail to enforce that trespass notice. So the police weren't acting like under their own authority. They were acting for the Board of Health. And then in their factum, they're saying, oh, you haven't named the police as a respondent. You need to be talking to them about this illegal action. It's like, no, they were under your authority. She hired them. She's also mischaracterizing the whole thing. She said it was all about just me trying to make a buck when it was clearly a protest. She says this wasn't a protest that happened. And despite all of their internal communications, which are in the record, show that they're all emailing each other at Toronto Public Health saying, yeah, there's a protest. You know, if there's any more activity at the protest, we need notes, we need reports on it. So it's really strange. It's just there's me trying to characterize this as like it's a rights infringement, and there was a protest happening there, and the charter rights were engaged, and they just say this is just commerce, like it's just commercial activity, and that's all under administrative rule, and no rights were violated, and Eileen had full authority to avoid judicial scrutiny, claim to be the occupant of a building without a court order, like seize private property. And by the way, he can't make any of these arguments because he's out of time and it should have been in another court. It's, just 2 totally different representations of the same event.
In the end, Adam leaves with a message for Canadians ahead of these proceedings.
At the beginning of this, I really thought that the government was bad, that it was like this separate thing than me, and you just look at it like, oh, the government's bad, the government's corrupt. What I'd like people to understand more is the government is just a stack of papers, and any corruption that exists within it is as a result of men and women acting in an evil manner who are compromised in one way or another by sin. So my recommendation to people is realize that, understand it. Who was the president who said, ask not what the government can do for you, but what you can do for your government? This is it. It's things like this, standing firm in situations, holding people accountable. The government doesn't really do that itself. It doesn't have its own will. It's like done by men and women acting. So use your free will, repent, turn from your sin, do the right thing, and enact the change that you want to see.
If you would like to support Adam's challenge and help cover the significant legal expenses resulting from his efforts to hold the COVID regime accountable, you can make a donation to the federal nonprofit organization called Concerned Constituents of Canada. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. Rebel News has been giving a voice to the little guy just like Adam throughout the last few years. And if you would like to support this work and keep our independent journalism afloat, please consider becoming a Rebel News Plus subscriber at rebelnewsplus.com. That's rebelnewsplus.com.